Sommelier is a person who helps a wine client, a wine customer, a guest, really, in a restaurant setting, have a great experience. And I come from a background of hospitality. My dad was in hotels. So I look at it as helping someone enjoy their experience. Wine is one part of that. It's an important part. And I do everything I can to bridge that gap. Yeah, I find just the act of engaging them on a topic not related to wine goes a long way. My dad really impressed on me the importance of connecting with your guests. And I think that really helps. Like when people come in, I try to connect with them so that before we ever get around to talking about wine, they already have some sense that this isn't someone who is hung up on how much they know or hung up on their ego. They're interested in me having a good time. The other part of that answer really is storytelling, and I am a storyteller at my core. So I think when you get to that point, you can frame a lot of wine information within a narrative, and it doesn't feel like you're just throwing esoteric facts at them. And I love that challenge. It is a restaurant. It is a fusion, really, to put it in some Milwaukee, Wisconsin context, of supper club and fine dining and family-style restaurant. So it's a unicorn. We are almost exclusively private. Having said that, we help you design the kind of restaurant event you want to have. Can be a special date night for 2 people, can be a retirement party for someone you know very well with 50 people. There's definitely a speakeasy feel. Yeah. The other cool thing, and our staff just loves this, is the building is so nondescript. So it really is a very powerful example of that experience when you cross a threshold into a different world. The door opens, you're greeted, and everything immediately transforms you and kind of prepares you for that experience. In fact, we prefer that people don't even get to the point where they have to knock. We're there ready for them. We see them approaching, and we open the door just as they hit the threshold. Sometimes we have people call us from the stoop saying, I've parked nearby, I think I'm nearby, I'm at this nondescript building on the corner, where do I go from here? And then we just open the door and they're right there. Yeah, so by my reckoning, we're the 3rd largest restaurant seller in Milwaukee.
Oh my.
Hard to get real numbers from folks, but we're somewhere in the 1,800 to 2,000 bottle range, and it's all organized and cataloged. But here's what's kind of cool. There is no wine list per se. We work with you, as I was mentioning, to plan your event, and then I coordinate with the chefs, and we look at the food that you have all agreed to have for the evening, and then I pair each course with a wine from the collection. So the business model, from a sommelier point of view, is something more akin to something you would have seen in Paris or Moscow or New York 100 years ago. I'm over here in the wine cellar buying wine. My directive is just to buy good wine. The day will come, a month later, a year later, 5 years later, when there's the opportunity to use that wine. I have that story that's very rare. As an American, I grew up with wine. My parents separated when I was very young, and my dad lived in San Francisco in the late 60s. So he got into wine, and then when I would go to visit him on school vacations and whatnot, he would let me have a little glass of wine with food. But he also took me to Napa and Sonoma, and probably saw 50 wineries before I was 10.
Wow.
Which that did not launch me, but it just sort of planted a seed. And then did the regular thing in college of drinking too much beer, but the curiosity was always there. And then I had the good fortune, as I was finishing college, to have a couple of wine mentors. And I realized, this is something I really need to explore. I stayed on the path. I tried to stay on the path. I went to graduate school, got a degree to be an archivist. And while I was looking for a job as a professional archivist, I thought, well, I'll go to work part-time at a wine store because I have all this curiosity. On day one, within the first 15 minutes, as I was dusting bottles, I realized whatever this is, this this. And I thought, I'll give it a year. And that was June 6, 1996, and I've never looked back. One was a sculptor and the other was a poet.
Really?
So that sort of informs how I look at wine, I suppose. The sculptor is a man named Bobby Joe Scribner, who's now, in Northern Illinois. The poet is a man who was also an editor, turned out to be one of the giants of 20th century American poetry, Michael Cudahy. And I was his assistant for a poetry journal. And those were formative experiences, but they really challenged me, they really pushed me. And that was in an era unlike today where if you were learning about something and you said something that was just way off base, they didn't care about your feelings. They would just say, you just said something stupid. Yeah, so I brought two books today, and they are very special to me. One is called The Treasury of American Wines. It was published in 1973 by Crown, and it is it's largely been forgotten, and it is one of the iconic books of wine literature in America, and arguably the most important book since the repeal of Prohibition. The other book is called The Pro Football Experience. It is a genuine coffee table book. And it was edited by the iconic NFL executive David Boss. David Boss turns out to be central. He was to the first book. He was the vision. He created the vision for the Treasury of American Wines. And the reason these are important to me right now and today, Ray, is that this year marks the 50th anniversary of the Treasury of American Wines. So this book was the brainchild of David Boss. David Boss, for listeners who don't know that name, and they probably don't, David Boss was the person who created marketing for the NFL in the 1960s. And he was ultimately recognized by the Hall of Fame, one of the few people who was not a player to be recognized by the Hall of Fame in Canton. He designed and marketed the NFL at a time when other leagues hadn't even thought about doing that. Any boy who liked football in the 1960s or 1970s had those posters of their favorite team. He designed all those. He designed the covers for the first 25 Super Bowls. He is single-handedly responsible for the imaging of the NFL, probably over a 3-decade period. He lived in Los Angeles. Turns out he was a big aficionado of wine. So he met the biggest person in Southern California for wine in those circles, a gentleman named Nate Croman. Nate was a Beverly Hills attorney. He created the UCLA wine extension course, which is famous within the wine world for whatever that's worth. Yeah, and he created it because he went to UCLA in the early '60s and said, "Do you have a course that I can take?" Because he was starting to take wine in a more earnest way, and they said no. And it occurred to him shortly thereafter, well, I'll just ask them if I can create it. And he did. Nate Croman became the regular wine columnist for the LA Times over about a 16-year period. According to his daughter, Lucy, that's about 700 pieces of writing. He also became very famous in California as a critic of sorts. He was a wine buyer for the legendary Scandia restaurant in Los Angeles in the 70s. And so he wielded a tremendous amount of influence. So David Boss came to him and said, I have this idea for a book. And Nate said, that just feels too big to take on. And David Boss said, no, we're going to do this. And Nate acknowledges him at the end of the book for driving him to accomplish this. They brought in 2 other gentlemen, and this quartet of 4 unlikely horsemen put together a book over the course of about 2 or 3 years. They became a runaway bestseller, had tremendous influence, and is important not only for the scope of what it accomplished, but also for presenting on a silver platter the American wine world to the American consumer a couple of years before the famous tasting in 1976, The Judgment of Paris. Yeah, so it includes California and I think 8 other states. And if you put your yourself in the shoes of an editor at Crown in New York City, you would probably tell Nate and David Boss to limit it to just California because it would sell better.
Yeah.
And they to their credit, they pushed back and said, no, we feel like in terms of the heritage of this country, it encompasses all the states that are wine-producing states. They may not all be at the same level today, but at some point, many of them will reach a level that we can't even begin to appreciate right now. That was visionary. He mentions Oregon in a very skeptical way, in a sense, and he only mentions 2 wineries, but he says, Oregon could be very special. He only mentions 1 winery for Washington State. So it gives you some idea of how far we've come in 50 years. It's the letter P for Philip, then my middle name, Scott, with 2 T's, and then my last name, MacConnell, MacConnell. So it's P, Scott MacConnell @gmail.com.